Hello and welcome back to Storytime with Alex, reading Supernatural Night Terror by John Passarella. It's already getting to a head. Sam's trying to kill the nocnitsa. Dean is trying to save the sheriff's daughter Lucy. What's going to happen? Let's find out! Chapter 24. Sam closed the door softly behind him. While feeding off the life energy of Olga Kucharski and generating living nightmares in town, the nocnitsa might not notice his approach, but that was no excuse for carelessness. He might have one chance to kill the night hag. Once it left Olga's house, it could go anywhere and elude Dean and him until dawn, growing more powerful with each passing hour. Pressed against the wall, he eased forward, the living room through the entranceway on his left. Olga sat on the opposite side of the wall, feeding the monster that was exacting the old woman's revenge, while terrorizing the entire town. Raising his wrought iron short spear in a double overhand grip, Sam stepped away from the wall. Though he stood in relative darkness, he remembered the layout of the room, imagined the exact position of the ratty recliner, picturing the table and lamp beside it, the ivory-coloured antimacassar on the headrest. Taking a deep breath, he rushed through the entranceway and struck out with the short spear, aiming the tip about a foot above the headrest. He overbalanced when the spear tip whistled through the air and took a divot out of the drywall. Other than the ambient light coming through the edges of the blinds, the only illumination in the living room came from the glowing red eyes of the nocnitsa, from where the monster perched on the left armrest of the recliner, staring at him. "Too late, Hunter," the nocnitsa rasped like wind-given voice. The monster's body was a deeper black than the darkness she inhabited, presenting a sinuous, three-dimensional silhouette Sam could track, her torso and limbs little more than muscles stretched over a narrow skeleton with overly long fingers and toes. Though she had stopped feeding, she remained solid, at least for the moment. "Feeding off a harmless old woman," Sam said, subtly altering his stance to allow for a second quick strike with the iron rod. Not impressed. "The choice was hers," the night hag said. As she talked, she moved her fingers, hypnotically curling and uncurling like a magician preparing for a demonstration of sleight of hand. "She wanted revenge, prayed for it, dreamt about it. That's why I was drawn to her. And what a feast of fearful images she provided." A long sigh of pleasure escaped the nocnitsa's elongated maw. "But she's dead now." As if to punctuate those words, the TV remote control slipped from Olga Kucharski's fingers and struck the floor. The twin burning embers of the nocnitsa's eyes seemed to track the downward movement. Sam lunged forward, roaring as he swept the point of the wrought iron short spear through the night hag's torso. With a sharp hiss, the monster rose towards the ceiling, dissolving into loose shadow like dissipating coils of black smoke. For a moment, Sam thought he'd pierced its solid form, but the monster's head and glowing eyes drifted away from him, and it spoke once more. "I will gorge on this town's darkness. I will feed until no one is left, and there is nothing you or any hunter can do to stop me." Sam darted around the recliner and swung the short spear over his head, as if striking a piñata, aiming for the spot between the two glowing red eyes, the last solid remnant of the night hag's body. A desperation move, one he didn't expect to succeed, and in that he wasn't surprised. The burning eyes faded away before the wrought iron got close. Sam stumbled forward but caught himself before he crashed into the street-facing window. He turned around as the table lamp and the television came back on. Despite expecting the worst, he was startled by what he saw. Olga Kucharski's body had been reduced to a desiccated husk, with papery, liver-spotted skin stretched taut over her arthritic bones, her head little more than a skull with wisps of grey hair clinging to the sides. Sam feared that if he touched her she would crumble to dust. He reached into his jacket for his cell phone. Dean was running for his life. Technically, he was running for Lucy Quinn's life, but he had his hand wrapped around hers, and if the charger caught them, it would run them both down. When his Impala had been possessed, it hadn't ended well. Dean was determined to avoid a similar outcome. He looked up and smiled. "Thank you." "What?" Lucy said. "Get behind that monster," Dean said. "But not too close, and watch out." Gleaming under a streetlight, a parked mustard-yellow Hummer H2 awaited them. Lucy ran alongside the formidable SUV and ducked behind it. Dean leapt onto the hood, scrambling up onto the roof, dropping flat as he grabbed the luggage rack and spun himself round to face forward. He whipped out his automatic and fired several shots at the onrushing Charger. The second shot blew out the front passenger tyre, and the fifth ruptured the driver's side tyre. The Charger's windshield wipers continued to burn, but the flames on the white-striped hood and the windshield itself burned themselves out. Fortunately, some of the gasoline from the Molotov cocktail had leaked through the gaps in the crumpled hood, and smoke billowed out from both sides. The engine was burning. The racing car chewed through its damaged wheels and surged forward on the rims, striking sparks from the asphalt. Dean braced for the impact. The Charger slammed into the frame-mounted bumper of the Hummer, rocking the much larger car backward, but not by much. Nevertheless, the impact hurled Dean forward, wrenching his arm in its socket as he tumbled into the Hummer's windshield. His grip held, and he stared down at the Charger as it reversed a short distance, then rammed the Hummer a second time. Flames were spreading under the muscle car, and Dean had a bad feeling about the next few seconds. Pulling himself back to the roof of the Hummer, he raced towards the rear of the SUV and leapt into the darkness, spotting Lucy crouched below as he sailed over her. He hit the ground on his shoulder and rolled with the impact. Behind him, a concussive roar presaged a blast of open furnace heat that washed over him as a fireball spread outward and lit the night sky. Metal debris rained down around him, rattling across the road, trailing smoke, and vanished in the blink of an eye. The fiery light winked out, and with it the heat was abruptly gone. Dean's cell phone rang. Brushing himself off, Dean stood and massaged his sore neck with his free hand as he answered the call. "Sam?" "Olga's dead," Sam said, his voice dejected. "The nocnitsa? Tell me you got it." "Wish I could." "Son of a bitch," Dean said. "What now?" "Dean, she's gonna kill them all." "Be there in 5 minutes," Dean said. "We need a plan." As Dean and Lucy hurried back to the diner, thunder rumbled ominously and rain began to fall. Much like here. Dean glanced upward as lightning speared the night sky, leaving stark after-images on his retina. The storm was coming. As was his custom, Lou Santulli stayed after hours to file paperwork at Santulli Auto Sales, his used car dealership. When he was done, he walked through the place in the dim lighting and checked the desks of his salesman and receptionist, making sure they hadn't left a mess for the morning. Anything to keep himself busy. The longer he stayed at work, the less time he had to listen to his wife's grousing and a never-ending honey-do list. After hours, the dealership was a calm oasis for him to unwind. Before heading home, he'd play online poker for an hour or two, mostly losing, but he kept the losses manageable. The poker was another excuse to stay away from home. Hadn't always been that way, but business had been slow the last couple of years as the economy tanked. When it came to cars, people wanted to squeeze blood from a stone. More of them accepted used car purchases, but his margins kept getting shaved by the new frugality. But God forbid the Santullis had to tighten their belt. And yet that's what it had come to, and he had to listen to the complaining as if it was on a tape loop. As he lost another hand of Texas Hold'em, his third in a row, the intensity of the rain pounding the roof caught his attention. Second night in a row with bad storms. Torrential downpours and flash flooding made for a lousy commute. He read that power lines had been down by the previous night's storm, not too far from his home, but fortunately not affecting the Santulli household, or she would have had one more damn thing to complain about. With a heavy sigh, he ran his palm over his balding pate and leaned back in his leather desk chair. He ended his gambling session and shut down his computer. If the dealership lost power or was hit by a power spike, the machines could suffer damage, and the thought of replacing a bunch of computers set his ulcer percolating. He walked through the dim interior of the building and shook off the screensavers so he could power off each workstation. As extra precaution, he pulled the plugs from the outlets. The wind roared outside the broad plate glass windows, rain lashing against them almost horizontally. He walked to the locked door and looked out at the car lot. The multicoloured pennant flags that outlined the perimeter near the top of the streetlights whipped crazily for a few seconds before the lines snapped. Somebody's screen door cartwheeled down the street before sailing off into the night. The floor seemed to vibrate beneath him. A wooden fence slammed into the window next to him, causing him to jump backwards, heart pounding. Across the street he saw the funnel-shaped forming behind the squat white wooden building with Jake's Snack Shop painted on the front wall. They often ran over to Jake's for a quick lunch, a burger or hot dogs and some fries when he couldn't afford time away from his own business. Now he watched in horror as the funnel cloud barreled through the centre of the building, ripping it to shreds as if it had been stuffed into the bottom of a massive blender. Wooden debris blasted away in all directions. Lou stood mesmerised as the tornado swirled and pounded its way through the restaurant on a collision course with his parking lot. The funnel cloud expanded so wide he could no longer see the telltale shape without looking up, and then that was insufficient as it bore down on him. Belatedly, he realised he should seek cover. His business was housed in a split-level building with the offices in back. Up a few steps. No basement in which to seek shelter. His best bet was an interior office or closet with no windows. The roar became so loud he couldn't think straight. As he watched in horror, the white-striped blue Mini Cooper at the corner of the lot lifted upwards and flipped back towards the front windows. He ducked a second before it crashed through the plate glass window and demolished a desk. If he thought the roar of the tornado was loud before, nothing prepared him for the terrific noise that assailed his ears. The swirling winds reached into the building and whipped papers and mugs and desk planners into the maelstrom. He backed away, his jaw dropping as a red Mustang blew past the window, its bumper scraping along the asphalt before it rammed a silver Kia Sportage. One after another, the cars on his lot flipped over, rolled past, or soared overhead. Fierce winds buffeted him through the gap in the window and almost swept him off his feet several times. He clenched his jaw so tight his teeth began to ache. When a black Toyota Corolla rolled through the broken window and smashed into the Mini Cooper, Lou scrambled backwards, feeling his body become buoyant in the air, as if he had no more substance than a paper bag. In seconds the tornado would sweep him up into the vortex and hurl him into the night. He clawed his way along the wall, crawled up the steps to the upper level, and pried open the door to the storage closet in the middle of the building. He squeezed into the small room, and the door slammed shut behind him, so hard it rattled against its hinges. Squatting on the floor, hands wrapped around his knees, Lou Santulli prayed softly, almost incoherently, a rambling jumble of sibilant words. If only he'd skipped the online poker and driven home at the start of the storm. If only he'd waited until morning to tidy the office. More thunderous crashes and jarring bangs shook the walls of the building. The light in the closet winked out, plunging him in darkness. The roaring filled his ears, became his world. As the walls around him creaked and groaned, he fumbled in his pocket for his cell phone to call his wife, to apologize for avoiding her, to tell her he still loved her, despite all the pointless bickering. The phone display seemed unnaturally bright in the closet, revealing the shelves of notepads, folders, and cleaning supplies, and the blood dripping from his forehead. He must have been struck by debris and in his panic hadn't even noticed. Unfortunately, the cell phone had no signal. He held down the speed dial key for home to no effect. Pressed disconnect, speed dialed again, pressed disconnect, speed dialed. Something massive burst through the closet wall. Before his brain could register what the object was, it struck the front of his head with the force of a sledgehammer, pulping his eyes, smashing the bone and cartilage of his nose into his brain and crushing his skull. In the second or two before his cell phone shattered against an exposed 2x4, a woman's voice spoke through its tiny speaker. "Hello? Lou?" Roman Mesley woke up with someone shaking his shoulder. "Dude, wake up." "What?" "You gotta go to work, man." Roman sat up and looked around the basement room. He was sprawled on a sofa, facing a wide, flat TV screen. A game controller fell from his lap and clunked on the floor. It took him a few seconds to remember he'd stopped at his friend's house to pass some time before his shift. In Gavin's man cave. "Gavin, weren't we—" "Dude, you fell asleep in the middle of Halo," Gavin said. Ever hear of an energy drink? What's up with you? Forget your multivitamins? You look like shit, man. Trouble sleeping lately. I left for a Coke, but we lost power down here, so I figured I'd let you sleep until you had to leave. Which is now, dude. Oh, thanks, man. Don't want to be late. Roman pushed himself up from the sofa. Lately he'd been wiped out. Kept thinking he was on the verge of a nasty virus, but so far exhaustion was his only symptom. As he lumbered up the stairs and through the front door, he fought another jaw-cracking yawn and ran into a torrential downpour. His old black and tan Subaru Outback seemed a mile away. By the time he ran to the curb and fumbled his key into the lock, he was thoroughly soaked. As he started the engine, water dripping off his face and hands, he thought about putting in for a week's vacation. He'd sleep for 5 or 7 days. Make that 6. He'd save the 7th for a day trip somewhere. Pulling away from the curb, he felt a wave of exhaustion wash over him, and he became hypnotized by the fierce metronome of the windshield wipers on their highest setting. For a moment he thought his vision had dimmed, but darkness had come inside the car and swelled around him. The dashboard lights faded away, and a raspy woman's voice seemed to whisper in his ear, "Not done with you yet." When the engine died and the Outback's momentum carried it down the side of the road along a grassy embankment, Roman was already unconscious. His breathing laboured. "It's a freaking tornado," Dean said moments after Sam climbed into the Impala, dripping wet. Biting her nails nervously, Lucy Quinn leaned forward from the back seat. "This is totally crazy," she whispered. "Crazy's coming," Dean said, "but it hasn't reached the station yet." "I had it, Dean," Sam said, furious with himself. "Close enough to hurt it, just not bad enough." "We'll gank it, Sam," Dean said with more confidence than he felt. Through the frenetic, slashing arc of the wipers, clearing the windshield in split-second intervals, they watched the massive funnel cloud, a wedge of darkness against the evening sky, churn its way across the western edge of town. Dean drove west along Welker, proceeding with caution because he had no plan once he reached the tornado. Like catching a tiger by the tail. As if to confirm the foolhardy nature of his direction of travel, every other car on the road was racing in the opposite direction. They were a mile away from the tornado when it ripped the roof off a house and flung it into the night like a kite with severed strings. "Plus side," Dean said grimly, "we don't see any flying cows." When they were within half a mile, the funnel cloud swept across the parking lot of a gas station, veering towards the pumps. One of the supports holding a canopy over the gas station lot buckled, and the roof toppled over, metal screeching and scraping along the asphalt, trailing sparks. 2 blocks away, Dean jammed the brake pedal, skidding to a stop on the slick road. The explosion blossomed in front of them, and the concussive blast rocked the Impala's suspension. Bits of glass and flaming metal debris pelted the ground around them. A charred piece of gas pump housing plunked to the hood of the Impala and ricocheted across 2 lanes of traffic before slamming into a curb. "Dean, it's gone," Sam said. At first Dean thought his brother was referring to the gas station explosion, which, unlike the exploding Phantom Charger, had definitely not vanished. Flames continued to burn, smoke continued to billow into the night, and wreckage continued to clink and clatter around them. The gas station was real, not a living nightmare. Its destruction... Sorry, I was getting distracted. Its destruction was a reality, but then Dean noticed the absence of the fierce wind that had buffeted the Impala as they had approached the tornado. Looking left and right, and then leaning out the window for a better view, he confirmed that the twister was gone. "Small favours," he mumbled. Dean made a looping turn on the empty road and headed east back towards CJ's diner. They had travelled less than a mile when the Impala trembled slightly. A moment later it rocked to the right and shimmied. Thinking the car had taken some damage, Dean pulled to the side of the road for a quick inspection. The moment he stepped out of the car, the ground trembled. Along the street, parked cars began to wail as their theft alarms were triggered. Windows in a nearby building cracked and shattered. In the spread of the Impala's headlights on the asphalt, Dean saw cracks forming. "Great, tornadoes and now an earthquake," he muttered. He jumped back in the car, shifted into drive, and sped towards the diner. "Dean, look out!" Sam yelled. He saw it in time, a fissure opening diagonally across Welker Street, spreading wide enough to accommodate a car tyre and break an axle. He swerved away from the worst of it, but felt the Impala lurch over a gap when he gunned the engine. A Colorado State Patrol cruiser coming from the opposite direction wasn't as fortunate. As the fissure continued to widen, the front wheels of the speeding cruiser dropped into the gap and the front bumper smashed into the opposite edge. The vehicle tilted forward, slipping into the abyss. The doors of the cruiser swung open, and 2 uniformed troopers jumped out and scrambled away from the car a second before it lurched down into the crack. Only the trunk remained above ground. Dean slowed, waiting to see if the men needed help, but another State Patrol cruiser, which had been following the first, managed to stop before ploughing into the lead car. The 2 stranded troopers scurried back to the second car and climbed into the back. At the end of Roman Mesli's life, when he had no more left to give her, a spasm racked his body so violently his collarbone shattered. When the nocnitsa released her grip on his forehead, the husk of his body fell forward, dangling against the support of the shoulder strap. He had worried about potential tragedies and emergencies his whole life, despite actions and trainings he'd taken to prepare himself to face them. He'd never have to worry about them again. But she'd make his fears a reality, and in his own way, Roman had left his mark on the town. The nocnitsa shed her substance and spiraled up into the night air, potent with energy she'd culled from her first victims. With her glowing red eyes she gazed upon the town and the spreading chaos and roared with pleasure, a sound like shrill wind rustling through confined spaces. She could feel the town as a whole, from edge to edge, a busy little hive of fear and uncertainty, doubt and grief. For a few moments before flying down to her next victim, she rippled outward, a flash of darkness that would infect every mind within miles. Those awake would feel a cold chill race up their spine and experience an unexplained feeling of dread, while those asleep spoke her natural language, and she spoke to them deep in their minds, summoning the deepest darkness to the place where it could live. Oh man, it's a bit of a long chapter, but it's going down. Join us next time to see how the hell they're going to deal with this. Bit of a shorter one next time as well. See you there.